Hello and welcome back to Read Aloud. Today on Read Aloud, with Dan, by the way, that's me, we'll be doing some background on socialism, utopian and scientific, of course, by Friedrich Engels. Um, First, we're going to start with the preface to the first German edition, and then we're going to talk about and read the 1892 English edition introduction, the General Introduction and the History of Materialism. I'm not sure what I said before, but we are starting with the Prol Wiki. We're starting with the Prol Wiki on the text. Sorry, I don't know what I said there, but we're starting with the Prol Wiki here. The Prol Wiki. Here's the original text. It is great. It's the first edition. Socialism utopique et socialisme scientifique. And you'll notice right away it's different than the title that we got. I actually think the French title's better, isn't it? It tells you more clearly that there are two distinct kinds of socialism, whereas the English doesn't. I don't know what happened there. Right? Can someone explain that to me? I don't know. So I used this Prol Wiki because it includes the preface to the first German edition. You know, I thought... Yeah. Okay, I don't know. Let's just read this here. Here we go. The following work, this is the preface to the first German edition. The following work is derived from 3 chapters of my book. So Engels is writing this. From my book, Herrn E. Dürings Umwälzung der Wissenschaft, or Mr. E. Dürings Revolution in Science. Originally written Leipzig, 1878. Oh, really? Oh, okay. So I've been getting this wrong the whole... I thought it was 1880. All right, so I just learned something. I didn't even notice that when I read it before. So he says, I put them together for my friend, Paul Lafargue, for translation into French. So he writes it in German. His friend Paul translates it into French and added a few extra remarks. The French translation, revised by me, appeared first in the Revue Socialiste, and then independently under the title Socialism Utopic et Socialism Scientific, Paris, 1880. So in a way, I was right. I feel like I should say 1878, though. So he says a rendering into Polish made from the French translation has just appeared in Geneva and bears the title, whatever. And that was in 1882. I'm not going to try. I'm sorry, you guys. The surprising success of the, back to Lafargue translation in the French-speaking countries, and especially in France itself, forced me to consider the question of whether a separate German edition of these 3 chapters would not likewise be of value. Then the editors of Zurich Sozialdemokrat, how'd I do? Social, there it is. My tongue betrays me. Again, then the editors of Zurich Sozialdemokrat informed me that a demand was generally being raised within the German Social Democratic Party for the publication of a new propaganda pamphlets, and they asked me whether I would not apply those 3 chapters to this purpose. I was naturally in agreement with that and put my work at their disposal. It was, however, not originally written for immediate popular propaganda. How could what was in the first place a purely scientific work be suitable for that? What changes in form and content were required? So far as form is required, is concerned rather, only the numerous foreign words could arouse doubts. But even Lassalle, in his speech, and Friedrich Engels' propaganda writings, was not at all sparing with foreign words, and to my knowledge, there has been no complaint about it. You may be wondering, did Engels just name drop himself? Yeah. Engels says, since that time, our workers have read newspapers to a far greater extent and far more regularly, and to the same extent they have become thereby more familiar with foreign words. I have restricted myself to removing all unnecessary foreign words. Where they were unavoidable, I have refrained from adding so-called explanatory translations. The unavoidable foreign words, usually generally accepted scientific or technical expressions, would not have been unavoidable if they had been translatable. Translation, therefore, distorts the sense. It confuses instead of explaining. Like the title, right? Oral information is of much greater assistance. The content, on the other hand, I think I can assert, will cause German workers few difficulties. In general, only the third section is difficult, but far less so for workers, whose general conditions of life it concerns, than for the educated bourgeois, he says. In the many explanatory additions that I have made here, I have had in mind not so much the workers as educated readers, persons of the type of the Deputy von Ehren, the Privy Councillor Heinrich von Sibbel, and other Treitschkis. I can't. He says, who are governed by the irresistible impulse to demonstrate again and again in black and white their frightful ignorance, and following from this, their colossal misconception of socialism. If Don Quixote tilts his lance at windmills, that is in accordance with his office and his role, but it would be impossible for us to permit Sancho Panza anything of the sort. You might be thinking, Dan, what are those references to Don Quixote and Sancho Panza? And I don't know. I didn't look it up. I just figured I'd just skip it. Reading on. Such readers will also be surprised that in a sketch of the history of the development of socialism, they should encounter the Kant Laplace cosmology, modern natural science and Darwin, classical German philosophy and Hegel. But scientific socialism is, after all, an essentially German product and could arise only in that nation whose classical philosophy had kept alive the tradition of conscious dialectics in Germany. We have an annotation here. It says, original note. He says, in Germany is a slip of the pen. It should read, among Germans. For as indispensable, on the one hand, as German dialectics were for the genesis of scientific socialism, as equally indispensable for it were the developed economic and political conditions of England and France. The economic and political stage of development of Germany, which at the beginning of the 40s was still more backward than today, could produce at the most caricatures of socialism. Only by the he says German or true socialism. Only by the subjection of the economic and political conditions produced in England and France to German dialectical criticism could a real result be achieved. From this angle, therefore, scientific socialism is not an exclusively German, but just as much an international product. And this footnote was added by Engels to the third German edition of 1883. Okay. Reading on, Engels says, the materialist conception of history and its specific application to the modern class struggle between the proletariat and bourgeoisie was only possible by means of dialectics. And if the schoolmasters of the German bourgeoisie have drowned the memory of the great German philosophers and of the dialectics produced by them in a swamp of empty eclecticism, so much so that we are compelled to appeal to modern natural science as a witness to the preservation of dialectics in reality, we German socialists are proud of the fact that we are descended not only from Saint-Simon, Fourier, and Owen, but also from Kant, Fichte, and Hegel. And that is the preface to the first German edition I've found on the Prol Wiki. Now we'll go to the 1892 English edition introduction, the general introduction and the history of materialism. This is some good stuff in here. I don't know how to put this, but if you're like a baby leftist, if you've never read this, if this kind of content is new to you, just let it wash over you. You pick up more and more the more you do it. And here we go. This is the 1892 English edition introduction, general introduction in the history of materialism. The present little book, originally part of a larger whole. About 1875, Dr. E. Düring, this guy's an anti-Semite, private docent or a university lecturer who formerly received fees from his students rather than a wage at Berlin University. That's right, anti-Semites teaching at Berlin University. He says, suddenly and rather clamorously announced his conversion to socialism and presented to the German public not only with an elaborate socialist theory, but also with a complete practical plan for the reorganization of society. Hey, where have I heard this? An anti-Semite claiming to be a socialist who's got plans. A German anti-Semite. Engels says, as a matter of course, he fell foul of his predecessors. Above all, he honored Marx by pouring out upon him the full vials of his wrath. This took place about the same time when the two sections of the Socialist Party in Germany, the Eisenachers and the Lassallians, had just effected their fusion. This was at the Gotha Unification Congress. And thus obtained not only an immense increase of strength, but what was more, the faculty of employing the whole of this strength against the common enemy. The Socialist Party in Germany was fast becoming a power. But to make it a power, the first condition was that the newly conquered unity should not be imperiled. And Dr. E. Düring openly proceeded to form around himself a sect, the nucleus of a future separate party. It thus became necessary to take up the gauntlet thrown down to us and to fight out the struggle, whether we liked it or not. This, however, though it might not be an over-difficult, was evidently a long-winded business. Okay. As is well known, we Germans are of a terribly ponderous Gründlichkeit. Leave it up to the Germans to make a word called Gründlichkeit. Or he says radical profundity or profound radicality, whatever you may like to call it. Whenever any one of us expounds what he considers a new doctrine, he has first to elaborate it into an all-compromising system. He has to prove that both the first principles of logic and the fundamental laws of the universe had existed from all eternity for no other purpose than to ultimately lead to this newly discovered crowning theory. And Dr. Düring, in this respect, was quite up to the national mark. Nothing less than a complete system of philosophy, mental, moral, natural, and historical. A complete system of political economy and socialism. And finally, a critical history of political economy. 3 big volumes in octavo, heavy intrinsically and excuse me, heavy extrinsically and intrinsically, three army corps of arguments mobilized uh, against all previous philosophers and economists in general, and Marx in particular. In fact, an attempt at a complete revolution in science, these were what I should have to tackle. I had to treat all and every possible subject, from concepts of time and space to bimetallism. Hey Dan, what's bimetallism? That's a good question. Thank you for asking. It's also known as the bimetallic standard. It's a monetary standard in which the value of the monetary unit is defined rather as equivalent to certain quantities of two different metals, creating a fixed rate of exchange between them. In all historical cases, the metals are gold and silver. Bimetallism. I had to look that one up. Again, he says, I had to treat of all and every possible subject, from concepts of time and space to bimetallism, from the eternity of matter and motion to the perishable nature of moral ideas, from Darwin's natural selection to the education of youth in a future society. Anyhow, the systematic comprehensiveness of my opponent gave me the opportunity of developing, in opposition to him, and in a more connected form than had previously been done, the views held by Marx and myself on this great variety of subjects. And that was the principal reason which made me undertake this otherwise ungrateful task. Oh, and thank you, chat. Gründlichkeit, or thoroughness. I love that. There's a brewery by me called Bauhaus. They've got that painted on the wall, if I remember correctly. Anyways, Engels says, my reply. So hold up. So he goes, someone should write this, right? And he goes, and that's why I did it. So he goes on. He says, my reply was first published in a series of articles in the Leipzig Vorwärts. How did I do? That's hard. The chief organ of the Socialist Party, and later on as a book. Again, Herr Eugen Dürings Umwälzung der Wissenschaft, or Mr. E. Düring's Revolution in Science, quote-unquote revolution in science. It's sort of a dig. And a second edition of which appeared in Zurich in 1886. At the request of my friend, Paul Lafargue, now representative of Lille, I don't know, in the French Chamber of Deputies. He says, I arranged 3 chapters of this book as a pamphlet, which he translated and published in 1880 under the title, Socialism Utopique et Socialisme Scientifique. Okay. From this French text, a Polish and Spanish edition were prepared. In 1883, our German friends brought out the pamphlet in the original language. Italian, Russian, Danish, Dutch, and Romanian translations based on the German text have since been published. Thus, the present English edition, this little book, circulates in 10 languages. I'm not aware that any other socialist work, not even our Communist Manifesto of 1848 or Marx's Capital, has been so often translated. In Germany, it has had 4 editions of about 20,000 copies in all. The appendix, the mark, Did we skip that or something? He says was written with the intention of spreading among the German Socialist Party some elementary knowledge of the history and development of landed property in Germany. This seemed all the more necessary at the time when the assimilation by that party of the working people of the towns was in a fair way of completion, and when the agricultural laborers and peasant had to be taken in hand. The appendix has been included in the translation as the original forms of tenure and land common to all Teutonic tribes, or like I guess Germanic tribes, to all Teutonic tribes, and the history of their decay are even less known in Germany, in England, and in Germany. So he says, I have left the text as it stands in the original, in the original, without alluding to the hypothesis recently started by Maxim Kovalevsky, and I thought I had an image of this guy. I don't. Maxim Kovalevsky, according to which, bear with me here. I just can't find the photo quickly. I'm sorry. According to which, the partition of the arable and meadow lands among the members of the mark was preceded by their being cultivated for joint account by a large patriarchal family community embracing several generations, as exemplified by the still existing South Slavonian Zadruga, and that the partition later on took place when the community had increased, so as to become too unwieldy for joint account management. He says Kovalevsky is quite probably right. It's probably quite right, but the matter is still sub judice, or under consideration. A Zadruga refers to a type of rural community historically common among South Slavs. The term's been used by the Communist Party of Yugoslavia to designate their attempt at collective farming after World War II. A Zadruga. That's cool, right? Dan, what does Maxim Kovalevsky look like? Because I learned by seeing. Well, that's a good question. Thanks for asking. I did find a photo. This is what he looks like. Maxim Kovalevsky. Reading on, Engels says, the economic terms used in this work, and we're up here, as far as they are new, agree with those used in the English edition of Marx's Capital. We call it production of commodities, that economic phase where articles are produced not only for the use of the producers, but also for the purpose of exchange, that is, as commodities, not as use values. This phase extends from the first beginnings of production for exchange down to our present time. It attains its full development under capitalist production only, that is, under conditions where the capitalist, the owners of the means of production, employs for wages laborers, people deprived of all means of production except their own labor power, and pockets the excess of the selling price of the products over his outlay. We divide the history of industrial production since the Middle Ages into 3 periods. Handicraft. Small master craftsmen with a few journeymen and apprentices, where each laborer produces a complete article. Manufacture, where greater numbers of workmen, grouped in one large establishment, produce the complete article on the principle of division of labor, each workman performing only one partial operation, so that the product is complete only after having passed successively through the hands of all. Modern industry, where the product is produced by machinery driven by power, and where the work of the laborer is limited to superintending and correcting the performance of the mechanical agent. In the future, police will just fix robot dogs, you know? That'll be their job. Oh, God, I hate that I just realized that. He says, I'm perfectly aware that the contents of this work will meet with objection from a considerable portion of the British public. But if we continentals had taken this, what does he mean by that? Europeans? But if we continentals had taken the slightest notice of the prejudices of German respectability, we should be even worse off than we are. This book defends what we call historical materialism. And the word materialism grates upon the ears of the immense majority of British readers. Agnosticism might be tolerated, but materialism is utterly inadmissible. All right. Is he talking about agnosticism as in not believing in God? Or of like just not believing in the material world, or what? And yeah, what does continentalism mean? I don't know. I guess I'm going to read on. Engels says, and yet, the original home of all modern materialism from the 17th century onwards is England. And we read from Marx, who says, materialism is the natural-born son of Great Britain. Already, the British schoolman, Duns Scotus, pictured here, asked whether it was impossible for the matter to think. Duns Scotus was a Scottish Catholic priest and Franciscan friar, a university professor, philosopher, and theologian. Reading on, Marx says, in order to effect this miracle, he took refuge in God's omnipotence. That is, he made theology preach materialism. Moreover, he was a nominalist. Nominalism, the first form of materialism, is chiefly found among the English schoolmen. Nominalism. Hey, Dan, what's nominalism? Thank you for asking. It's the philosophical theory that the variety of objects to which a single generic word is given really have nothing in common with but the name itself. For example, dog. I guess. I don't know. You tell me. Marx says, the real progenitor of English materialism is Bacon. To him, natural philosophy is the only true philosophy, and physics based upon the experience of the masses is the chiefest part of natural philosophy. Anaxagoras and his homoiomeriae, Democritus, and his atoms, he often quotes as his authorities. I don't know what that word means. Homoiomeriae. According to him, the senses are infallible and the source of all knowledge. The senses are infallible and the source of all knowledge. Is that right? Marx says all science is based on experience and consists in subjecting the data furnished by the senses to a rational method of investigation. Induction, analysis, comparison, observation, experiment are the principal forms of such a rational method. Among the qualities inherent in matter, motion is the first and foremost, not only in the form of mechanical and mathematical motion, but chiefly in the form of an impulse, a vital spirit, attention, or a qual, to use a term of Jacob Boehme, Jacob Boehm's of matter, a qual. We come to the second note here, which I'm just going to skip. It's not important. Who cares? Reading on. He says, in Bacon, back to Bacon here, its first creator, materialism still occludes within itself the germs of a many-sided development. On the one hand, matter surrounded by a sensuous poetic glamour. On the other, the aphoristically formulated doctrine pullulates with inconsistencies imported from theology. Marx says, in its further evolution, materialism becomes one-sided. Hobbes is the man who systematizes Baconian materialism. Knowledge based upon the senses loses its poetic blossom. It passes into the abstract experience of the mathematician. Geometry is proclaimed as the queen of sciences. Materialism takes to misanthropy. If it is to overcome its opponent, misanthropic, flashless spiritualism, and that on the latter's own ground, materialism has to chastise its own flesh and turn ascetic. Thus, from a sensual, it passes into an intellectual entity. But thus, too, it evolves all the consistency, regardless of consequences, characteristic of the intellect. Hey, Dan, what is he saying here? Good question. Well, I don't know. I don't know. Let's just keep reading. Hobbes, as Bacon's continuator, argues thus: if all human knowledge is furnished by the senses, then our concepts and ideas are but the phantoms divested of their sensual forms of the real world. Philosophy can but give names to these phantoms. One name may be applied to more than one of them. There may even be names of names. It would imply a contradiction if, on the one hand, we maintained that all ideas had their origin in the world of sensation, and, on the other, that a word was more than a word, that besides the beings known to us by our senses, beings which are one and all individuals, there existed also beings of a general, not individual nature. An unbodily substance is the same absurdity as an unbodily body. Body, being, substance are but different terms for the same reality. It is impossible to separate thought from matter that thinks. Is italics. This matter is the substratum of all changes going on in the world. The word infinite is meaningless unless it states that our mind is capable of performing an endless process of addition. Only material things being perceptible to us, we cannot know anything about the existence of God. My own existence alone is certain. Every human passion is a mechanical movement which has a beginning and an end. The objects of impulse are what we call good. Man is subject to the same laws as nature. Power and freedom are identical. Marx goes on and says, Hobbes had systematized Bacon without, however, furnishing a proof for Bacon's fundamental principle: the origin of all human knowledge from the world of sensation. It was Locke. I don't have a picture of Locke, do I? It was Locke who, in his essay on the human understanding, supplied this proof. Back to Hobbes. Hobbes had shattered the theistic prejudices of Baconian materialism. Collins, Dodwell, Coward, Hartley, Priestley similarly shattered the last theological bars that still hemmed in Locke's sensationalism. At all events, for practical materialists, deism is but an easy-going way of getting rid of religion. From Marx and the Holy Family. Thus, you see what I mean? Karl Marx is a little not as easy to understand as Engels. He's just, I don't know, more poetic or something. Just like relax or something. I don't know. They translate Marx into English sometimes, and then I think to myself, I wish they would translate this into English, because this is still so. Reading on. Engels says, thus, Karl Marx wrote about the British origin of modern materialism. If Englishmen nowadays do not exactly relish the compliment he paid their ancestors, more's the pity. It is none the less undeniable that Bacon, Hobbes, and Locke are the fathers of that brilliant school of French materialism which made the 18th century, in spite of all the battles on land and sea won over Frenchmen by Germans and Englishmen, a preeminently French century, even before that crowning French Revolution, the results of which we outsiders in England as well as Germany are still trying to acclimatize. Acclimatize? Dan. He says there's no denying it. About the middle of this century, what struck every cultivated foreigner who set up his residence in England was what he was then bound to consider the religious bigotry and stupidity of the English respectable middle class. We at that time were all materialists, or at least very advanced free thinkers, and to us it appeared inconceivable that almost all educated people in England should believe in all sorts of impossible miracles, and that even geologists like Buckland and Mantle should contort the facts of their science so as not to clash too much with the myths of the book of Genesis. While, in order to find people who dared to use their own intellectual faculties with regard to religious matters, you had to go amongst the uneducated, the great unwashed, as they were then called, the working people, especially the Owenite socialists, who we've spoken about. But as England has been civilized since then, the exhibition of 1851 sounded the knell of English insular exclusiveness. England became gradually internationalized in diet, in manners, in ideas. So much so that I began to wish that some English manners and customs had made as much headway on the continent as other continental habits have made here. I wonder what he's referring to. Anyhow, the introduction and spread of salad oil, before 1851 known only to the aristocracy, has been accomplished by a fatal spread of continental skepticism in matters religious. And it has come to this, that agnosticism, though not yet considered the thing quite as much as the Church of England, is yet very nearly on par, as far as respectability goes, with baptism, and decidedly ranks above the Salvation Army. What is he referring to there? I didn't look it up, I'm sorry. He says, and I cannot help believing that under those circumstances it will be consoling to many who sincerely regret and condemn this progress of infidelity to learn that these new-fangled notions are not of foreign origin, are not made in Germany, like so many other articles of daily use, but are undoubtedly Old English, and that their British originators 200 years ago went a good deal further than their descendants now dare to venture. What indeed is agnosticism, but, to use an expressive Lancashire term, shamefaced materialism? The agnostic's conception of nature is materialistic throughout. The entire natural world is governed by law and absolutely excludes the intervention of action from without. But, he adds, we have no means either of ascertaining of or disproving the existence of some supreme being beyond the known universe. Now, this might hold good at the time when Laplace, to Napoleon's question why in the great astronomer's treatise on celestial mechanics, the creator was not even mentioned, proudly replied, I had no need of this hypothesis. But nowadays, in our revolutionary conception of that universe, there's absolutely no room for either a creator or a ruler. And to talk of a supreme being shut out from the whole existing world implies a contradiction in terms, and, as it seems to me, a gratuitous insult to the feelings of religious people. So what's he saying here? I don't know. I think he's saying agnostics, grow up. There's not even any room for the possibility of a God in a materialist conception of nature. What are you doing? I think that's what he's saying. You tell me. Again, he says, our agnostic admits that all our knowledge is based upon the information imparted to us by our senses. But, he adds, how do we know that our senses give us correct representations of the objects we perceive through them? And he proceeds to inform us that whenever we speak of objects or their qualities, of which he cannot know anything for certain, but merely the impressions which they have produced on his senses. Now, this line of reasoning seems undoubtedly hard to beat by mere argumentation. But before there was argumentation, there was action. Im Anfang war die Tat. That's from Goethe's Faust. Is it Goethe's? Which is, in the beginning was the deed. And human action had solved the difficulty long before human ingenuity invented it. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. It's one of my favorite phrases that he says. From the moment we turn to our own use of these objects, according to the qualities we perceive in them, we put to an infallible test the correctness or otherwise of our sense perception. If these perceptions have been wrong, then our estimate of the use to which an object can be turned must also be wrong, and our attempt must fail. But if we succeed in accomplishing our aim, if we find that the object does agree with our idea of it and does answer the purpose we intended for it, then that is proof positive that our perceptions of it and of its qualities so far agree with reality outside ourselves. This is just a big argument about whether objective reality exists, guys. There are people who are like, well, we can't know that this is real. We could be in the mind of a turtle floating in space. Shut the fuck up. He goes, shut the fuck up. There's real stuff. You can test it. What are you talking about? Stop it. Grow up. You're not clever. You're not smart. What he says. He says, and whenever we find ourselves face to face with a failure, then we generally are not long in making out the cause that made us fail. We find that the perception upon which we acted was either incomplete and superficial, or combined with the results of other perceptions in a way not warranted by them, what we call defective reasoning. So long as we take care to train our senses properly, and to keep our action within the limits prescribed by perceptions properly made and properly used, so long as we shall find that the result of our action proves the conformity of our perceptions with the objective nature of the things perceived. Guys, is it a big chicken and the egg thing? What's coming first? He says it's objective reality itself, right? Let me read that again. Not in one single instance so far have we been led to the conclusion that our sense perception, scientifically controlled, induce in our minds ideas respecting the outer world that are, by their very nature, at variance with reality, or that there is an inherent incompatibility between the outer world and our sense perceptions of it. But then come the neo-Kantian agnostics, this is Kant, and say, we may correctly perceive the qualities of a thing, but we cannot, by any sensible or mental process, grasp the thing in itself. This thing in itself is beyond our ken. What? Out of one's range of knowledge or sight. One's range of knowledge or sight. Yeah. To this, Hegel long since has replied, if you know all the qualities of a thing, you know the thing itself. Nothing remains but the fact that the said thing exists without us. And when your senses have taught you that fact, you have grasped the last remnant of the thing in itself. Kant's celebrated unknowable Ding an sich, to which it may be added that in Kant's time our knowledge of natural objects was indeed so fragmentary that he might well suspect, beyond the little we know about each of them, a mysterious thing in itself. But one after another, these ungraspable things have been grasped, analyzed, and, what is more, reproduced by the giant progress of science. Yeah, the fact that we can reproduce these things is like, no, guys, objective reality is real. It's there. Stop pretending like it might not be there. What are you doing? You're not clever. And he says, and what we can produce, we certainly cannot consider as unknowable. That's the thing, right? That's how it works. To the chemistry of the first half of this century, organic substances were such mysterious objects. Now we learn to build them up one after another from their chemical elements without the aid of organic processes. Modern chemists declare, as soon as the chemical constitution of no matter what body is known, it can be built up from its elements. We are still far from knowing the constitution of the highest organic substances, the albuminous bodies. But there's no reason why we should not, if only after centuries, arrive at the knowledge and, armed with it, produce artificial albumin. Albumin. Albumin, the most abundant protein in blood plasma, synthesized by the liver, plays a crucial role in maintaining fluid balance by preventing fluid from leaking out of blood vessels, transporting nutrients and other molecules, and contributing to blood's oncotic or colloid osmotic pressure. Thank you. So he says, but if we arrive at that, I guess producing albumin, we shall at that same time have produced organic life. For life, from its lowest to its highest forms, is but the normal mode of existence of I don't know, those bodies. How do you say that? How do you say that? Albuminous. Albuminous. All right, albuminous. 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 Oh, there it is. Jesus. Man, words are hard sometimes. Thanks for bearing with me. Sometimes I catch those words and I practice them beforehand, but sorry about that. All right. Reading on, Engels says, as soon, however, as our agnostic has made these formal mental reservations, he talks and acts as the rank materialist he at bottom is. He may say that, as far as we know, matter and motion, or as it is now called, energy, can neither be created nor destroyed, but that we have no proof of their not having been created at some time or other. But if you try to use this admission against him in any particular case, he will quickly put you out of court. If he admits the possibility of spiritualism in abstracto, he will have none of it in concreto. As far as we know and can know, he will tell you there is no creator and no ruler of the universe. As far as we are concerned, matter and energy can neither be created nor annihilated. For us, mind is a mode of energy, a function of the brain. All we know is that the material world is governed by immutable laws and so forth. Thus, as far as he is a scientific man, as far as he knows anything, he is a materialist. Outside his science, in spheres about which he knows nothing, he translates his ignorance into Greek and calls it agnosticism. This is an extremely clever man, isn't he? I love that. At all events, one thing seems clear. Even if I was agnostic, it is evident that I could not describe the conception of history sketched out in this little book as historical agnosticism. Religious people would laugh at me. Agnostics would indignantly ask, was I making fun of them? Is this a dig, bro? And thus, I hope even British respectability will not be overshocked if I use in English as well as in so many other languages the term historical materialism to designate that view of the course of history which seeks the ultimate cause and the great moving power of all important historic events in the economic development of society, in the changes in the modes of production and exchange, in the consequent division of society into distinct classes, and in the struggles of these classes against one another. This indulgence will perhaps be accorded to me all the sooner if I show that historical materialism may be of advantage even to British respectability. I've mentioned the fact that about 40 or 50 years ago, any cultivated foreigner settling in England was struck by what he was then bound to consider the religious bigotry and stupidity of the English respectable middle class. I'm now going to prove that the respectable English middle class of that time was not quite as stupid as it looked to the intelligent foreigner. Its religious leanings can be explained. That's the introduction to the English edition intro. He throws in general introduction to the history of materialism there. Okay. We just did a little background there. Scientific, utopian, and socialism. Or I think better put, utopian socialism and scientific socialism. As in they're two distinct kinds. Despite the fact that Our critics call our socialism utopian. Or they call us anarchists. There's a lot of irony in that, isn't there? Okay. Well, if you're checking this out, if you're watching this live, stick around. If you're watching the replay, why don't you go ahead and check out the work? Check out Chapter 1 of Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. Part 1, Utopian Socialism. Go check that out. If you like my content, and I hope you do, and I hope you get something out of it, please consider supporting this. You can do so by hanging out with us in the live chat when I stream and when I read this live. I do it on Twitch, as you may know, and I do it in the morning, Central Time, usually around 8 or 9 a.m. or so. I don't know. I don't have a schedule. No one's really, paying me to stay on a schedule, so I just do it whenever I want. And yeah, I hope you like my content. If you do, and if you have a couple bucks laying around, that's another way you could support. You could support on Twitch. You could subscribe, or you can support on Patreon. Become a patron for as little as $1 a month. You'll get early access to my content, including these replays of my readings, and you'll support and help to keep alive independent communist media, the goal of which is to spread revolutionary consciousness. If you think I'm doing a good job, consider supporting. Love your face.